The scream that shattered the afternoon silence at Millbrook Elementary playground would haunt the memories of 37 children for years to come. It wasn't the typical yelp of scraped knees or playground disputes, but something deeper, more primal, something that spoke of deliberate cruelty. Emma Chen, 11 years old, and carrying the extra weight that made her a target for the school's more vicious students, found herself pressed against the rough bark of the old oak tree behind the swing sets. Her pink backpack lay scattered in the dirt, its contents spilled like broken dreams across the mulch. Above her, Huan Guyon's face twisted into an expression of pure malice. Her perfectly manicured fingers wrapped around Emma's wrist with surprising strength. "Get down!" Hua hissed, her voice carrying the kind of authority that came from knowing she'd never faced real consequences. "I said get down on your knees, you fat pig." The circle of children who had gathered maintained their distance, some with phones already recording, others simply frozen in the kind of shock that accompanies witnessing something truly terrible. The autumn air hung thick with the smell of dying leaves and fresh mulch, but underneath it all was the metallic scent of fear. Emma's legs trembled as Hoa forced her into a half-kneeling position, one knee pressed into the dirt, while the other struggled to maintain balance. The position was deliberately humiliating, designed to rob Emma of any dignity she might have possessed. Tears streamed down Emma's round cheeks, mixing with the dirt that Hoa had already smeared across her face. "Please," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible above the distant sounds of the school day continuing normally, just 100 yards away. "I didn't do anything to you." The slap came without warning, sharp and vicious, the sound echoing across the playground like a gunshot. Emma's head snapped to the side, and a gasp rose from the watching children. Some started to back away, suddenly understanding that they were witnessing something far beyond typical playground bullying. Hoa's smile was cold as winter steel. "You exist," she said simply. "That's what you did to me. You exist in my space, in my school, taking up room that someone better could use." She reached down and grabbed a handful of small rocks from the landscaping border, her movements deliberate and calculated. The first stone hit Emma's shoulder, the second, her chest. Each impact drew a whimper from the kneeling girl, but she didn't cry out again. Something in her had already begun to shut down, retreating to a safer place inside her mind. What none of the children watching knew was that Emma Chen wasn't just another student at Millbrook Elementary. Her mother, Dr. Sarah Chen, served as the town's mayor, having won election the previous year on a platform of child safety and community protection. Her father, Detective Marcus Chen, worked as the county sheriff's right-hand man, specializing in cases involving crimes against children. The Chen family had moved to Millbrook specifically for its reputation as a safe, nurturing community where children could grow and thrive without fear. They had researched the school district extensively, attended town meetings, and invested in a home 2 blocks from the elementary school so Emma could walk safely to and from classes. Emma had never mentioned Hoa's previous harassment to her parents. The subtle shoulder checks in the hallway, the whispered insults during lunch, the way Hoa would knock Emma's books from her desk when teachers weren't looking. Emma had hoped it would stop on its own, that drawing attention to it would only make things worse. But this was different. This was public, vicious, and being recorded by multiple phones. This was the kind of assault that left scars far deeper than skin. Hua selected a larger rock, about the size of a golf ball, and weighed it in her palm. "You know what I think," she said conversationally, as if they were discussing the weather. "I think you should transfer schools. Find somewhere they have special classes for people like you." The rock struck Emma's forehead with a sickening thud, opening a cut that immediately began to bleed. The sight of blood seemed to energize Hoa. who reached for another handful of stones with renewed enthusiasm. It was then that Tommy Martinez made a decision that would change everything. Tommy, a quiet kid who usually kept to himself, pulled out his phone and dialed 911 instead of just recording like the others. "There's a girl being attacked at Millbrook Elementary," he whispered into the phone, his voice shaking. "She's bleeding. The other girl is throwing rocks at her head." The 911 operator's voice was calm but urgent. "What's your location exactly, son?" "The playground behind the school. By the big oak tree. Please hurry." What Tommy didn't know was that all emergency calls in the county were automatically routed to Sheriff Chen's department, and that the sheriff himself monitored the radio during school hours. Marcus Chen's blood turned to ice when he heard the address come across the radio, followed by the description of an 11-year-old Asian girl being assaulted. He was in his patrol car and racing toward the school before the dispatcher finished relaying the information. His wife Sarah received the call from the school principal 30 seconds later, as she sat in her mayor's office reviewing budget proposals. "Mrs. Chen," Principal Williams's voice was tight with panic. "There's been an incident involving Emma. You need to get here immediately." Sarah's world tilted on its axis. What kind of incident? Is she hurt? "Another student attacked her. Physically attacked her. In front of other children. Mrs. Chen. It's bad." The phone slipped from Sarah's fingers as she grabbed her keys and ran for the door, leaving behind her carefully organized afternoon of municipal meetings and community planning. Nothing mattered except getting to her daughter. Back on the playground, HOA was reaching for another rock when the sound of sirens began to wail in the distance. The approaching emergency vehicles seemed to break whatever spell had held the watching children in place, and several of them finally found their voices. "Stop it! HOA!" called out Jessica Williams, her voice high and scared. "You're really hurting her." HOA spun around, her face flushed with adrenaline and something darker. "Mind your own business, Jessica, unless you want to be next." But the spell was broken. The sirens were getting closer, and some of the children were already backing away toward the school building. Emma remained on her knees, blood dripping from the cut on her forehead onto her white school uniform shirt. The first patrol car came screaming into the school parking lot at exactly 2:47 p.m., followed immediately by the mayor's official vehicle and an ambulance that had been dispatched as a precaution. Sheriff Chen was out of his car before it came to a complete stop, his face a mask of controlled fury as he spotted the crowd of children near the oak tree. What he saw when he reached the playground would fuel his nightmares for months to come. His daughter, his beautiful, gentle daughter, kneeling in the dirt with blood on her face, while another child stood over her with a rock in her hand. "Emma." Sarah's voice cut across the playground as she ran from the parking lot, her mayor's heels clicking against the asphalt before she kicked them off to run faster across the grass. HOA turned at the commotion, the rock still in her hand, and found herself face to face with a sheriff's deputy whose badge read Chen, and whose eyes held the kind of cold professional anger that came from years of dealing with the worst humanity had to offer. "Drop the rock," Marcus said, his voice deadly quiet. "Drop it now, and step away from my daughter." The word daughter hit the gathered children like a physical blow. Suddenly, the presence of police cars and the mayor's vehicle made terrible sense. Emma wasn't just another student. She was the daughter of two of the most powerful people in town. HOA's hand opened reflexively, the rock falling to the ground with a dull thud. For the first time since the attack began, her confidence wavered as she looked up into the face of a man who had spent 15 years putting criminals behind bars. "Ma'am," Marcus addressed Principal Williams, who had arrived breathless from the school building. I need you to clear all the other children from this area immediately. This is now a crime scene." Sarah reached Emma at the same moment the EMT arrived, her hands gentle as she helped her daughter to her feet. "Baby, I'm here. Mommy's here. You're safe now." Emma collapsed into her mother's arms, finally allowing herself to truly cry. The kind of deep, body-shaking sobs that come from release as much as pain. "She said I didn't deserve to exist," Emma whispered against her mother's shoulder. "She said I was taking up space from someone better." The words hit Sarah like physical blows, each syllable igniting a fury she hadn't known she possessed. As mayor, she had dealt with budget disputes and zoning complaints. She had never dealt with someone who had deliberately tried to destroy her child's spirit. Marcus was reading HOA, her rights, in a voice so controlled it was almost robotic. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." "You can't arrest me," HOA said, her voice rising with panic as the reality of her situation began to sink in. "I'm just a kid. Kids can't get arrested for playground fights." "This wasn't a playground fight," Marcus said, as he guided her hands behind her back for the cuffs specially designed for juvenile arrestees. "This was assault with a weapon, battery, and harassment. You're 11 years old, which means you're old enough to understand the difference between right and wrong." The sight of HOA being led away in handcuffs sent a ripple of shock through the remaining children. Several of them had recorded parts of the attack on their phones, and the footage would later prove crucial in the court proceedings that followed. As the ambulance pulled away with Emma and Sarah inside, word of the incident began to spread through Millbrook like wildfire. By evening, it would be the only topic of conversation at dinner tables across the town. The Martinez family, whose son Tommy had made the 911 call, found themselves thrust into the spotlight as well. "I couldn't just watch anymore," Tommy told the local news reporter who showed up at their door. "She was bleeding, and Emma never hurt anybody. It wasn't right." The investigation that followed was swift and thorough. Sheriff's deputies interviewed every child who had witnessed the attack, collected the recorded phone footage, and documented Emma's injuries with the kind of precision typically reserved for adult assault cases. Dr. Patricia Santos, the emergency room physician who treated Emma, cataloged the injuries with clinical precision, but barely controlled anger. Contusion to the forehead requiring 3 stitches, bruising on both shoulders consistent with thrown objects, psychological trauma consistent with deliberate humiliation and assault. What emerged during the investigation painted a picture of systematic bullying that had escalated far beyond anything the school administration had recognized or addressed. HOA had been targeting Emma for months, but always in ways that left no witnesses or physical evidence. The turning point came when Detective Lisa Rodriguez, assigned to the case, discovered that HOA had been documenting her harassment of Emma in a private social media account. Photos of Emma eating lunch alone, video clips of her struggling in gym class, mocking commentary about her weight and appearance. The digital evidence painted a clear picture of premeditated cruelty. But the real bombshell came 3 days after the attack, when Rodriguez's investigation uncovered something that changed everything. HOA's family, it turned out, had been hiding a significant secret that explained both her sense of entitlement and her apparent immunity from consequences. HOA's father, Vincent Nguyen, wasn't just a successful businessman as he'd claimed when enrolling HOA at Millbrook Elementary. He was the silent partner in a development company that had been seeking permits for a major shopping complex on the land currently occupied by the town's community center and library. The development project had been stalled for months by Mayor Chen's administration, which had refused to grant the necessary permits due to community opposition and environmental concerns. Vincent had been quietly pressuring school board members and town council representatives, using his daughter's enrollment at the prestigious elementary school as a way to build social connections with influential families. The investigation revealed that Vincent had been making strategic donations to school programs and PTA activities, building relationships with parents who might influence the permit process. HOA's attack on Emma wasn't just bullying. It was the daughter of a would-be developer attacking the daughter of the mayor who stood in his father's way. This revelation transformed the case from a simple assault into something much more complex and troubling. Detective Rodriguez brought her findings to Sheriff Chen and Mayor Chen during a tense meeting in the sheriff's office. "This adds a whole new dimension to what happened," Rodriguez explained, spreading the evidence across the conference table. "Your daughter wasn't randomly targeted by a school bully. She was targeted by someone whose family had specific reasons to want to intimidate and humiliate the mayor's family." Sarah Chen stared at the documents in disbelief. "You're saying this was planned? That an 11-year-old girl planned to assault my daughter as part of some kind of political intimidation?" "I'm saying the apple doesn't fall far from the tree," Rodriguez replied grimly. "We found text messages between Vincent Nguyen and his wife discussing Emma specifically. They knew exactly who she was and who her parents were." Marcus Chen's hands clenched into fists on the table. "They used their child as a weapon against our family." The evidence was overwhelming. Text messages showing Vincent encouraging HOA to make friends with the important families at school. Photos of Emma taken by HOA and shared with her parents, with commentary about the mayor's fat daughter who was embarrassing the family name. Most damning of all was a recorded phone conversation between Vincent and a business associate, obtained through a warrant, where he joked about his daughter taking care of the Chen problem and how Mayor Chen would be too distracted with family drama to focus on blocking the development permits. The full scope of the conspiracy became clear during a family meeting at the district attorney's office. Vincent and Linda Nguyen sat across from the prosecutor, their expensive lawyer beside them. As the charges were read, "Vincent Nguyen, you're being charged with conspiracy to commit assault, child endangerment, and using a minor to commit a felony. Linda Nguyen, you're being charged as an accessory to conspiracy and child endangerment." HOA, sitting in juvenile detention, would face charges of assault with a weapon, battery, and harassment in juvenile court. But the revelation that her parents had encouraged and directed her actions added a layer of tragedy to her situation that even her victims found heartbreaking. "She's a child who was taught to be a weapon," Sarah Chen said during a victim impact statement. "That doesn't excuse what she did to Emma, but it explains it. The real villains here are the adults who turned their daughter into an instrument of intimidation and violence." The case drew statewide attention when it went to trial. News crews from 3 major cities set up outside the courthouse, drawn by the unusual nature of the charges and the involvement of high-profile local officials. Emma's testimony, delivered via closed-circuit television to protect her privacy, was devastating in its simple honesty. "I thought she hated me because I was fat," she said, her voice small but clear. "I didn't know her daddy told her to hurt me because he was mad at my mommy." The defense attorney's attempts to minimize the charges fell flat in the face of the evidence. The text messages, recorded conversations, and social media posts painted an undeniable picture of a family that had weaponized their child's cruelty for business purposes. Vincent Nguyen received 3 years in prison and was ordered to pay $50,000 in restitution to the Chen family. Linda Nguyen received 2 years probation and community service. Both were permanently banned from attending any Millbrook School District events or activities. HOA was placed in juvenile rehabilitation for 6 months, followed by 2 years of supervised probation and mandatory counseling. The judge's words during sentencing became widely quoted in discussions about childhood bullying and parental responsibility. A child is not born with cruelty in their heart. Judge Patricia Morrison said, "Cruelty is taught, modeled, and rewarded by adults who should know better." This young girl was failed by the very people who should have protected her innocence and taught her empathy. The development project that had started it all was permanently blocked by the town council, which voted unanimously to designate the community center and library area as protected public space. The vote was held exactly 1 month after the attack, with Emma and Sarah Chen in attendance. The community response to the incident was swift and decisive. A new anti-bullying program was implemented in all district schools, with mandatory training for staff, students, and parents. The Emma Chen Safe Schools Initiative became a model program that was eventually adopted by school districts across the state. Tommy Martinez, the boy who had called 911, was recognized as a local hero and received the county's Youth Courage Award. His decision to seek help instead of just recording had potentially saved Emma from even more serious injuries. But perhaps the most significant change came in the form of a new town ordinance, passed unanimously by the city council. That made it a felony for adults to encourage, direct, or reward bullying behavior by minors. The Millbrook Protection Act established criminal penalties for parents who use their children to intimidate or harass others. 6 months after the attack, Emma Chen stood at the podium in the town council chambers, reading from a prepared statement to a packed room of community members. The cut on her forehead had healed to a thin white scar, barely visible unless you knew to look for it. "I want to thank everyone who helped me that day," she said, her voice stronger than it had been in the courtroom months earlier. "But I also want to say something about HOA. She hurt me really bad, and that was wrong. But I learned that someone taught her to be mean, and that's not her fault." The room was silent as Emma continued, "I hope she learns to be kind, because everyone deserves a chance to be better than the worst thing they've ever done." The applause that followed was subdued, but heartfelt. A community acknowledging both the pain that had been inflicted and the grace with which it had been received. Mayor Sarah Chen, watching her daughter from the front row, felt a pride that went beyond her role as a mother. Emma had been broken down and built back up, emerging stronger and more compassionate than before. The final chapter of the story came a year later, when Hoa Nguyen, now living with her grandmother in another state and attending a specialized school for children with behavioral challenges, sent a letter to Emma through their respective counselors. The letter was short and carefully worded, obviously written with therapeutic guidance, but the emotion behind it was genuine. "I'm sorry I hurt you. I'm learning that being mean doesn't make me strong. It makes me weak. I hope someday I can be the kind of person who protects people instead of hurting them." Emma chose to write back, a decision that surprised many, but fit perfectly with the empathy she had shown throughout the ordeal. Her response was equally brief, but profound. "I forgive you. I hope you find happiness and learn to be kind to yourself too." The correspondence continued sporadically over the following months. 2 children healing from the same incident in different ways. Emma learned that forgiveness could be a source of strength rather than weakness. Hoa learned that genuine remorse was the first step toward redemption. Principal Williams, who had been criticized for not recognizing the bullying before it escalated, implemented a comprehensive reporting system that encouraged students to speak up about harassment they witnessed or experienced. The system included anonymous reporting options and immediate intervention protocols. "We failed, Emma Chen," Williams acknowledged during a school board meeting. "We had warning signs, and we didn't act quickly enough or decisively enough. That will never happen again at Millbrook Elementary." The playground where the attack occurred was redesigned with better sight lines and additional adult supervision areas. The old oak tree, which had provided cover for HOA's assault, was surrounded by benches and designated as a peace circle, where children could go to resolve conflicts with adult mediation. Detective Rodriguez, whose investigation had uncovered the deeper conspiracy, received a commendation from the State Attorney General's office for her thorough work. The case became a model for investigating childhood bullying that might have adult criminal involvement. Too often, we treat bullying as just a kid problem, Rodriguez explained to a gathering of law enforcement professionals. But sometimes there are adults pulling the strings, and we need to be prepared to investigate and prosecute accordingly. The Nguyen family business collapsed in the aftermath of the criminal convictions. Their development company filed for bankruptcy, and their reputation in the construction industry was permanently damaged. The price of using a child as a weapon proved to be far higher than they had anticipated. Sheriff Chen, who had maintained his professional composure throughout the investigation and trial, finally allowed himself to feel the full weight of his emotions during a quiet moment with his daughter a year after the attack. "I'm proud of how brave you've been," he told Emma as they sat together on their back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "But I'm sorry you had to be so brave so young." Emma leaned against her father's shoulder, feeling safe in a way she hadn't fully appreciated before the attack. "I learned something important," she said thoughtfully. "Being different isn't something to be ashamed of. It's something that makes me special." The community of Millbrook emerged from the ordeal changed but stronger. The incident had forced difficult conversations about privilege, bullying, and the responsibility adults bear for the behavior of children in their care. Town council meetings began, including regular reports on the Safe Schools Initiative. Parent education programs were expanded to include workshops on recognizing and addressing bullying behaviors. The community center that Vincent Nguyen had tried to destroy was renovated and expanded, funded partly by the restitution money from his conviction. 2 years after the attack, Emma Chen stood once again at the old oak tree, but this time she was there by choice. The Peace Circle had become a popular gathering spot, and Emma often spent her lunch period there, reading or talking with friends. The scar on her forehead had faded to near invisibility, but the internal scars had healed into something stronger than unmarked skin. Emma had learned that she possessed a resilience she never knew existed, and a capacity for forgiveness that impressed even the adults around her. Tommy Martinez, now Emma's close friend, often joined her at the Peace Circle. Their friendship had been forged in crisis, but had grown into something genuine and supportive. They had formed a student advocacy group that helped other children report bullying and harassment. Sometimes bad things happen so that better things can grow from them. Emma told a group of younger students during a peer counseling session, "What happened to me was awful, but it taught me that I'm stronger than I thought, and that there are always people who will help if you ask." The Millbrook Protection Act was credited with preventing several similar incidents in other communities. Parents across the state began to understand that encouraging their children's aggressive behavior could result in criminal charges, leading to a measurable decrease in parent-endorsed bullying. Mayor Sarah Chen was re-elected by the largest margin in the town's history, her handling of the crisis having demonstrated a level of integrity and strength that impressed even her political opponents. She continued to advocate for child protection measures at the state level, using her family's experience to push for stronger anti-bullying legislation. The story of what happened at Millbrook Elementary became a case study in criminology and child psychology programs across the country. The unique nature of the adult conspiracy behind the childhood bullying provided valuable insights into the complex dynamics that can drive seemingly inexplicable juvenile behavior. 3 years after the attack, Emma Chen gave a presentation to the state legislature's Education Committee about the importance of comprehensive anti-bullying programs. Her poise and articulation impressed seasoned lawmakers, but it was her message of hope and resilience that truly moved them. Bullying doesn't just hurt the person being bullied, she explained to the committee. It hurts the bully too. And it hurts the whole community. But when adults take responsibility and communities come together, healing is possible for everyone. The legislation that resulted from her testimony established statewide standards for anti-bullying programs and created criminal penalties for adults who encourage or facilitate bullying behavior by minors. The Emma Chen Act became a model for similar legislation in other states. As Emma prepared to transition from elementary to middle school, she carried with her not just the memory of trauma, but the knowledge that she had survived it and helped prevent others from experiencing similar pain. The shy, quiet girl who had knelt in the dirt behind the oak tree had evolved into a confident young advocate for justice and compassion. The final measure of healing came when Emma chose to include HOA in her middle school graduation speech, not as a victim recounting her trauma, but as someone who understood the complexity of human nature and the possibility of redemption. I learned that hurt people sometimes hurt people, Emma said, looking out at an audience that included her parents, Tommy Martinez, Principal Williams, Detective Rodriguez, and dozens of community members who had supported her through the ordeal. But I also learned that healed people can help heal people. The thunderous applause that followed wasn't just for Emma's academic achievement, but for her remarkable journey from victim to survivor to advocate. In the space of 3 years, she had demonstrated that the human spirit's capacity for growth and forgiveness could triumph over even the most deliberate cruelty. Sheriff Chen wiped tears from his eyes as he watched his daughter accept her graduation certificate. The scared, bleeding child he had found on the playground had grown into a young woman of extraordinary character and strength. Mayor Sarah Chen felt a different kind of political satisfaction than she had ever experienced before. The policies and programs that had emerged from her daughter's trauma were making real differences in children's lives across the state. Sometimes the most important legislation came not from political maneuvering, but from personal pain transformed into public good. As the graduation ceremony concluded and families gathered for celebration, Emma found herself standing once more near the old oak tree, now surrounded by flowering bushes and memorial plaques honoring children who had overcome adversity. The tree that had once been a place of humiliation had become a symbol of hope and renewal. Hua Nguyen, now living in Oregon with her grandmother and thriving in her new school, watched the graduation ceremony via live stream at the invitation of Emma's family. The girl who had once thrown rocks at Emma's head now spent her free time volunteering at an elementary school, helping younger children resolve conflicts peacefully. Their correspondence had evolved into a genuine friendship built on mutual understanding of what it meant to carry shame and work toward redemption. They would never be close friends in the traditional sense, but they shared a bond forged in crisis and strengthened by forgiveness. The transformation of Millbrook Elementary became a national news story, featured in educational journals and policy magazines as an example of how communities could respond to childhood trauma in ways that promoted healing rather than punishment. Educators from across the country visited the school to observe the Peace Circle program and the comprehensive anti-bullying initiatives. But for Emma Chen, the most important victory wasn't the legislation or the national recognition or the awards that decorated her bedroom wall. The most important victory was the simple fact that she woke up each morning excited about the day ahead, unafraid of the playground or the classroom or the future. The girl who had once been forced to her knees in humiliation now stood tall, not in defiance or anger, but in the quiet confidence that comes from having faced the worst and discovered that you are stronger than you knew. The rocks that had been thrown at her had not broken her spirit, but had polished it, revealing a diamond-bright core of resilience and compassion. On her last day at Millbrook Elementary, Emma placed a small stone at the base of the oak tree, not as a weapon, but as a symbol. The stone bore a simple inscription: "From pain comes wisdom. From forgiveness comes peace." It would remain there for years to come. A quiet reminder that even the darkest moments can be transformed into sources of light for others walking similar paths. As Emma walked away from the playground for the final time as an elementary student, she carried with her not just the lessons learned from textbooks and teachers, but the deeper knowledge that comes from having been tested by life and emerging victorious. The scream that had shattered the afternoon silence 3 years before had eventually transformed into a voice of hope that would continue to inspire others long after the playground games had ended and the children had grown into adults. The reckoning at Millbrook Elementary was complete, not because justice had been served in the traditional sense, but because a community had learned to transform trauma into strength, fear into compassion, and victimization into advocacy. In the end, that may be the most powerful form of justice of all: